Our subject is part of the ruins of the magnificent Whitby Abbey complex on the east coast of England. I drew this in a quick 5-6 minute sketch for another video, and I really enjoyed it so much. I thought it was a fantastic subject to come back to and to think about drawing it with a little more nuance than in a 5 or 6 minute drawing, to really suggest the stonework, to really get a sense of the age that we see on this exposed, weather-beaten headland on the east coast of England. So when I start, the important thing is to try and avoid too many long, straight, hard lines, because there aren't that many long, straight, unbroken lines in the building. Because of the distance we're at, there are some, and so that's okay. But even those we want to do with a fairly light touch so that we can come over the top with some suggestions of texture later. So at this point, I'm really just trying to eyeball the proportions and work out what's happening. I actually wasn't able to work out exactly the relationship between the lower and upper ruins on the left-hand side when I did this as a 5-minute sketch. But I realised as I looked at it more carefully that the lower section, the lower part of it, is closer than the upper part. It just looks like those columns, if you like, between the arches all spring up from the same place, but they're actually set further back. And so now that the structure makes sense, it's easier for me to draw it, I find. Now, I had to make a choice early on about the hatching, and that was a bit of a challenge. When I drew this in the 5-minute sketch, I hatched vertically because there was just absolutely no way I would have time to do anything else. And when I finish the hatching of this drawing later, I'll show the vertical hatching, and you can just see the difference between going vertically or horizontally. But because I knew I had more time for this, I decided to go with the horizontal hatching. Now, this took me just under an hour to draw in real time, so it's reasonably sped up now. What I'm trying to do is to get the outline, the bones of it done. I want to suggest the really jagged, broken edges where we have broken stonework, not so much where it's weathered, but where it's literally fallen down or been pulled down, and we have quite jagged edges, because they go a great way to suggesting the history and what's happened here. And then, of course, I also want to suggest the stonework, and I want to make it small enough or detailed enough that I suggest the scale. One of the problems with a scene such as this, where it's an enormous building that we're looking at some distance off, even though the stones are quite large, they're relatively small to see at this scale. And yet, if I don't draw any individual stones I draw or suggest at the right scale, I actually change the feel of the building. If I make them larger, I in some ways make the whole building feel smaller. It's like when we make the leaves of a tree larger than they should be, somehow it makes the tree look smaller. So they're the issues we have to think hard about. But really, in a freehand sketch such as this, the important thing is to keep the perspective angles correct, because no matter how nicely we do our weathered stone edges, if the overall lines of the building aren't right, it will still look not right. So having been able to draw those first arches on the left-hand side fairly accurately, I'm now using them as a reference point when I go vertically and horizontally to the right. Now, it does get hard on the front of the building, front of the abbey, to really work out what's happening. But I can work out enough of the detailing that I think I can certainly draw the effect. I mean, this building, this drawing, is another example of we're really drawing the effect of all the weathered stones and the ruination of it. We're not drawing the exact detail. It's the same way as we draw a tree. We draw the effect of the leaves, not an accurate representation of the leaves. And so with this, we want to keep the same feeling of looseness over the whole drawing. We don't want any one part to start to look more detailed, more intensely accurate than any other part, because that will just make it look odd. So we want to keep the same, if you like, commitment to line and to speed and to rhythm. I think this is where establishing a drawing rhythm is really important, because if we get a rhythm going, it in a way brings a consistency to all the choices that we make and the sort of time we allow to do them, so that they end up, the lines all end up having the same feel, the same look, and the degree to which we simplify ends up being fairly consistent across the whole drawing, across the whole subject. You know, unless of course we deliberately go more gestural towards the edges or in less focal points, but that's another artistic choice again. So now I'm just trying to work out the how the facade works, and to make sure I keep it actually vertical. Because of the way I have lights set up and the camera and such things, sometimes when I'm drawing off to the right too much, I start to get cramped for airspace with my right arm and with my head. And sometimes that can just mean I start to tilt my head a bit, and that can lead me astray in doing verticals. They can start to slope down to the left. So I do try and have to avoid that a bit. Now you can see with the hatching, there's an awful lot of hatching. The hatching horizontally turned out to be a large commitment. Look, it probably took 2/3 of the time I spent drawing was actually doing hatch lines. But I really do think it was the right choice, because my general rule for hatching, the underlying principle I use when I'm trying to work out what direction will I hatch my lines, is firstly, what direction of lines will reflect the underlying form. So if we're looking at a ball, for instance, the lines are going to be curved in some way. But when we have something such as a building, well, in a way, we can still, as long as the lines are straight, they can go in any direction. They can go vertically or horizontally. And as I said, I'll show you shortly that quick drawing I did where I did my lines in a very ragged fashion vertically. But I really think that the emphasis, when we look at the stonework and all the courses one after the other, and because they're weathered, which emphasizes them, the effect is very much, with the stones, a horizontal one. And so I decided that doing these hatch lines horizontally would better reflect what was happening. But you can see how when we have things such as these rounded towers at the front, I'm rounding my lines around the towers, around the underlying form. Whereas across the front of the walls, the lines follow the perspective angles. And I think that's an important consideration too. And so in some ways, we can't really do those hatch lines until we're confident that we know the perspective angles. Now I'm calling these hatch lines, not cross-hatching lines, because I'm only doing lines in one direction. If I were to bring lines across the top of these lines angled in another direction, then I'm crossing the hatching lines and I'm doing cross-hatching. And cross-hatching can be great when you want to get some really dark areas, or you have a wider range of value of darkness that you want to represent, establish in your drawing. But I think for this, hatching in the one horizontal direction, but allowing for the perspective and the direction that the form, that the wall is going, lines up better with the old stones, the old stone blocks, and the weathered appearance of the building. Now you'll notice I am certainly singling out some individual stones to draw, but generally I'm trying to resist the urge to do that too precisely, although I do want what I draw to be accurate enough in terms of size and shape. But whereas I do some stones completely, others I'll just do one or two lines, and sometimes I'll just do some dots, which nicely reflects the parts of the wall where a part of a stone corner has knocked off or been eroded, and so that corner in the stonework catches the shadows. So the whole idea is to keep the perspective precise and to keep the effect of the stonework loose as we draw it, not to start to do too much in too much detail, because then, well, where do we stop? And the truth is we're never going to do it accurately enough. These people are really important for scale. It is an enormous building, and this is only a small part of the complex. It came to ruin when Henry VIII decided that he needed their money more than they did. So there's just a small bit of ruin off to the side, which I decided to draw just to indicate that there is more to this complex than just what we see here. And now I add some darker lines. And with the hatching too, it is important to indicate variation of darkness. There's my 5-minute version, or 8 minutes really, with the vertical hatch lines. Now, if you can imagine today's drawing done with that direction, I hope you agree that going horizontally somehow has more of the feel of the ancient weathered stonework. It connects with the visual appearance that we're already seeing than the vertical one does, which was really out of necessity of speed. So just a little more work here down the front along the bottom, and my probably 50-minute drawing of Whitby Abbey directly in freehand pen is done. And of course, you'll find this photo reference on my channel community page. G'day, I'm Stephen Travers. Look, why not give this a go? In some ways, a very forgiving subject. But look, whatever you draw and however you draw it, make sure you have fun. I'll see you next time. Bye.